Game over, Brandon. Brandon.
I'll never forget the sound of champagne bottles popping as my husband celebrated destroying my family. He smiled at me like he'd won the lottery. Then my father walked in, and I watched my husband's victory smile twist into pure terror. The envelope in my father's hand? It held secrets that would bury him alive. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about trust, love, and revenge. Before I reveal how one night turned my entire life into a nightmare, and then into the most satisfying justice you've ever heard, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell because this story has more twists than a thriller movie, and you won't believe where it ends. I promise you, the last 5 minutes will leave you speechless. I'm Gemma, and this is the story of how I watched my perfect life explode. Twice. 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 32, successful in marketing, and married to a man who seemed absolutely perfect. Brandon was the kind of husband other women envied. Charming, ambitious, always knew exactly what to say. We had the dream house with the white fence. We traveled to exotic places, and from the outside, we looked like we'd stepped out of a romance novel. My father, William, owned Henderson Industries, a manufacturing company he'd built from absolutely nothing. Brandon worked there as operations manager, and my father always said he was like the son he never had. I should have known that phrase would come back to haunt us. But even in paradise, there are shadows. I started noticing things that didn't add up, small things at first. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and find Brandon sitting in the dark, just staring at nothing. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd flash that perfect smile and say he was just stressed, that my father worked him hard. Then there were the phone calls. He'd step out of rooms when his phone rang, taking conversations on the balcony or in his car. When I'd ask who it was, he always had a reasonable explanation. His mother, an old college friend. Work stuff. I believed him because I wanted to, because doubting him felt like doubting myself. Then my father came to me one afternoon, his face lined with worry. He told me something was wrong with the company accounts. Money was moving in ways that didn't make sense. Someone had been accessing files they shouldn't have access to. He looked so tired, so defeated. I made the mistake of mentioning it to Brandon that night. I'll never forget the way his eyes lit up when I told him, not with concern, with something else, something I couldn't identify then but recognize now as excitement. That night, I heard him on the phone again, speaking in hushed tones. "It's almost time. Stay ready." My gut screamed at me that something was terribly wrong, but my heart told me to trust the man I'd married. I chose my heart. Biggest mistake of my life. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning. I was having coffee, scrolling through emails, when a courier knocked on my door. He handed me 2 envelopes, 2 separate legal documents that arrived at the exact same moment. The first was a court summons. Brandon was suing Henderson Industries for $2.5 million, claiming harassment, wage theft, and psychological torture. The second was divorce papers. Brandon had moved out while I was asleep, packed his things like a ghost, and filed to end our marriage. But it was the text message that followed that really destroyed me. "I never loved you. You were just access to your father's company." 15 words that shattered 6 years of my life. The court case was a massacre. Brandon had evidence, mountains of it, forged emails that looked like they came from my father, saying horrible things about Brandon, fake witnesses, employees my husband had bribed or blackmailed into lying under oath, doctored recordings of my father's voice, edited to sound abusive and cruel. Medical reports claiming Brandon suffered from severe trauma and anxiety because of his workplace environment. And the cruelest part? He used things I'd told him in confidence, intimate details about my family, as weapons against us. He knew exactly where to strike because I'd handed him the knife myself. Our entire community turned against us. Friends stopped calling, clients dropped my marketing firm, claiming conflict of interest. My mother would cry herself to sleep every night, asking how we didn't see what Brandon really was. I started losing weight, not eating, barely sleeping. There was one night I found myself driving toward the bridge on the edge of town, and for just a moment I thought about how much easier it would be if I just stopped fighting. That's how low he brought me. That's how completely he'd destroyed everything I was. The day of the final ruling, my father collapsed on the witness stand. His heart condition, something we'd been managing for years, flared up under the stress. They rushed him to the hospital while the trial continued without him. The judge didn't even pause, didn't show an ounce of sympathy. And when the ruling came down, it felt like the floor opened up beneath me. Brandon won. $1.8 million to be paid within 30 days, or the company would be liquidated and sold. Everything my father had built over 40 years, gone. Because of the man I'd brought into our lives. But Brandon wasn't satisfied with just winning. No, he needed to humiliate us completely. 2 weeks after the judgment, he threw a massive party at this enormous mansion I'd never seen before. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. I had to see it, had to understand what I'd missed. When I walked in, the place was packed with people drinking expensive champagne, laughing, celebrating, and there was Brandon, holding court like some kind of king. When he saw me, his face lit up with this sick satisfaction. "Oh, good. You're here," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should see what winning looks like." Then she walked up and wrapped her arms around him. Carol, my former best friend. The woman I'd confided everything to, cried with, trusted completely. She kissed him right in front of me, and I watched Brandon's hand grip her arm so tight she flinched. "She understood ambition," Brandon announced to the room. "You were always too soft, Gemma. Too naive." The room laughed, actually laughed at my pain. I wanted to die right there. I should have left, should have walked out and never looked back. But something made me stay. Maybe it was the way Carol's eyes looked when no one was watching. Not happy, not victorious, scared. I slipped away from the party and found myself wandering through the house. Brandon was out on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear, and I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. "Phase 1 complete. Henderson's finished. Now we liquidate." A voice on the other end said something I couldn't make out, and then Brandon replied, "And the girl? She knows too much. She's broken. Nobody believes broken women. If she becomes a problem, accidents happen." He was talking about me, about making me disappear. Panic set in, but so did something else. Clarity, survival instinct. I snuck into what looked like Brandon's office during the party. His laptop was open, careless in his victory. I found offshore accounts with millions already transferred, partnership agreements with Martin Corporation, my father's biggest competitor. But the worst thing, the thing that made me physically sick, was a file labeled Project Gemma. Inside were photos of me from before we'd ever met, detailed notes about my personality, my vulnerabilities, my relationship with my father. A psychological profile that read, "Target is trusting, loyal to father, emotionally vulnerable after previous breakup. Ideal entry point to Henderson Industries." Our entire relationship had been scripted. Every date, every kiss, every "I love you" had been calculated. I was never his wife. I was his mark. I was about to run, to get as far away as possible, when the music suddenly stopped. The entire house went dark. For a few terrifying seconds I thought this was it. This was the accident he'd planned. But then the lights came back on and I heard gasps from the main room. I ran back to see what was happening, and I froze in the doorway. My father was standing in the entrance, not weak, not dying, not the broken man I'd left at the hospital. He stood tall, powerful, very much alive. And behind him were people in FBI jackets, a woman with a briefcase who I'd later learn was a forensic accountant, and a private investigator I recognized from true crime shows. Brandon's face went white, actually drained of all color. "William," he stammered, "you look, well." You could hear the disappointment in his voice. He'd been expecting a dying man, maybe even hoping for it. My father smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. "Disappointed? I know you've been waiting for my funeral." Brandon tried to laugh it off, that same charming laugh that had fooled us all. "This is my party, get out." But my father didn't move. "No, this is your funeral, son." What happened next was the most beautiful destruction I've ever witnessed. My father walked to the center of the room, and someone handed him a remote control. The massive TV screen flickered to life, and suddenly everyone at the party was forced to watch the truth unfold. The first image was a driver's license. But the name wasn't Brandon. It was Brett Calloway. My husband wasn't even who he said he was. The screen showed police reports from 2 other states, warrants for fraud, documentation of 3 other families he'd destroyed exactly the same way, married into them, gained their trust, bankrupted them, disappeared. Then Carol stood up, and I thought she was going to defend him. Instead, she reached under her dress and pulled out a small device, a wire. She'd been recording everything. "I'm not his girlfriend," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm a private investigator your father hired 6 months ago. Everything Brandon said tonight, every threat, every admission is recorded." The room erupted in chaos. People trying to leave, others pulling out phones. But the FBI agents blocked the exits. My father wasn't done. The screen changed again, showing bank records, email trails, recorded phone calls. He explained how he'd known about Brandon's real identity for 6 months, how he'd let Brandon think he was winning, fed him fake information, set up accounts with bait money that was tracked with every transfer. The court case? My father's lawyers had intentionally lost to build a criminal case. Every victory Brandon thought he'd won was actually a carefully laid trap. The FBI had been watching everything, building a federal case that was so airtight Brandon would never see freedom again. Then came the final twist that made my knees weak. My father pointed to a man in the corner. Martin, the CEO of Martin Corporation, Brandon's secret partner. "He's under arrest too," my father said calmly. "Coordinated sting operation." "Oh, and Brandon, this mansion you're so proud of? It's FBI property. You've been living in a sting operation for 2 weeks. Every guest here tonight is either an investigator or a witness. You celebrated your victory in a building full of people gathering evidence against you." Brandon lunged at my father, but agents grabbed him before he got close. He was screaming, incoherent, nothing like the smooth-talking man I'd married. "You can't do this. I won. The judge ruled for me." My father's voice was ice cold. "That judge is under investigation too. Your lawyer, also arrested. They were part of your conspiracy. Everything you think you won is gone." Then Brandon turned to me, and I saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. "Baby, please. Tell them I loved you. This was real." Something inside me snapped. 6 years of lies, months of torture, weeks of wanting to die, all of it crystallized into one moment of pure clarity. I walked up to him and slapped him across the face as hard as I could. The sound echoed through the silent room. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "I was a person, a human being, and you made me a target." The FBI agent started listing the charges: fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, identity theft, perjury, wire fraud. Then he added one more that made my heart stop: conspiracy to commit murder, based on Brandon's threat to me that Carol had recorded. The agent looked at Brandon with disgust. "Wire fraud is federal, automatic 20 years. Attempted murder conspiracy, another 15. You're looking at 35 to 50 years in federal prison." Every account frozen, every asset seized. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry, everything purchased with fraud money, gone. Brandon would leave prison an old, broken man with nothing. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time, not with love, not with regret, with pure hatred. Because in his mind, this was my fault. I'd failed to be the perfect victim. That's when I knew I'd never really known him at all. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom and gave my testimony. I told them everything, every detail of the manipulation, the psychological abuse, the threats. Brandon cried during my testimony, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, nothing. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. When I walked out of that courthouse, the sun had never felt brighter. My father's serious heart condition turned out to be mild, exaggerated as part of the sting operation to make Brandon overconfident. The company is thriving now. All the damage Brandon caused was reversible because my father had protected the real assets while Brandon stole fake ones. My mother and I have never been closer. Carol became a real friend. We bonded over the shared trauma of being used by a monster. She told me once, "He tried to use me to destroy you. Instead, I helped destroy him." I started my own consulting firm called Phoenix Recovery, helping other victims of fraud rebuild their lives. I use my story to show them that survival is possible, that strength comes from the darkest places. I'm even dating again, slowly and carefully, but with wisdom I never had before. Because here's what Brandon never understood. He didn't break me. He revealed how strong I always was. I visited him once in prison. Just once. I needed to see him powerless, to understand that monsters are just weak men in masks. He looked small, aged, defeated. He begged for forgiveness, crying real tears for probably the first time in his life. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I looked at him and felt nothing but pity. "No, you're not," I said calmly. "You're sorry you lost. I came here for me, not you. To see that you have no power over me. You never did. I was always stronger than you." Then I walked away and never looked back. That's how the man who tried to destroy me ended up destroying himself. Brandon thought he was a master manipulator, but he forgot one thing. Underestimate a woman's strength, and you'll learn what real power looks like. Here's what I need you to do right now. First, if this story gave you chills, hit that like button. Let me know you felt every twist. Second, comment below. Have you ever had someone underestimate you? How did you prove them wrong? I read every comment and your stories inspire me. Third, subscribe and ring that notification bell because next week's story is even more insane. I'm talking about a woman who discovered her husband had an entire second family in the same town. You won't want to miss it. Fourth, share this video with someone who needs to hear that betrayal doesn't break you, it reveals your strength. Brandon thought my story ended with his victory. Instead, it began with his destruction. Remember, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one quietly planning 10 steps ahead. Thank you for watching. I'm Gemma, and this is my victory story. See you next week, survivors.